Alrighty. Excuse me. Welcome back to Free Read Fridays. I'm your intrepid narrator, Fragath, and my glass is tilting. I don't want things spilled. There we go. That would be bad. Um, Namely water. So this week we are starting a new literary adventure in the form of... Oh shoot, this has a map. I forgot this had maps. Oh no! I'll have to try and find those. In the form of The Jesus Incident by Frank Herbert and Bill Ransom. Does this say who Bill Ransom is in the back? So that I can explain who Bill Ransom is. And also learn who Bill Ransom I know is a poet. At any rate, as much as I love Frank Herbert, this particular trilogy would not have been possible without Bill Ransom. Um, it would not have come out the same way, and it's pretty brilliant. I think it holds up pretty well, even though the the third volume, The Ascension Factor, which was published after Frank Herbert's death, feels rushed in the extreme. Like, I was doing a reread of it this year in order to prep for this, and I was like, man, I remembered a bunch of individual incidents from this, but for some reason I thought it was from two books because so much happens so quickly. It's just like, nah, dude, we ain't got time. Don't focus on that. We're gonna skip over all that. It doesn't matter. We're moving the plot forward. They don't ruminate. For the most part. The second volume does. I would say the Lazarus Effect has a bit of rumination, as well as this one has a bit of rumination. Um, but the third one really doesn't. There just isn't time. there's so much it needs to cover, and you just pelt through it. I still like it quite a bit, the Ascension Factor, but it is pretty bonkers. So I'm going to have to find the maps, images of the maps, because they are fairly important um, in establishing the shape of the world, literally. Um, but it's okay. So, at the end of Destination Void, the clone crew, consisting of Raja Flattery, a bunch of people I don't remember the names of right off the top of my head. Sorry, just listen to that one if you care. Um, oh gosh, this is embarrassing. I know their names: Prue Wagand, John Bickle, and um, Gerald Timberlake. I don't think we ever saw his first name. They are fortunately listed on the second page of this book. Um, they are a clone crew that have to, in order to succeed at their mission of getting outward and investigate the stars for inhabitable planets, are being tested by Moonbase through arbitrary system failures and other things to basically create an artificial consciousness on the ship, using the ship. Um, Spoilers, and I'll give you about 5 seconds of me yammering before I get to them. You have about 5 seconds from this point in time, 4 seconds, 3 seconds. They succeed, and the final line of the book is the ship speaking to them as it brings them to this planet, and says, "You must decide how you will worship me," with a capital S. And this does not take place immediately after, I regret to say. In fact, this book opens up a tremendous can of worms, particularly towards the end. But it kind of hints at it along the way, and it's see if you catch it. It's kind of you kind of can observe the shape of this tremendous can of worms um, ideologically, conceptually, and otherwise, philosophically, if you want, kind of just by the shadow that it leaves. It's actually fairly brilliantly done because it's like blink and you'll miss it because it's so big you forest for the trees in. It's crazy. I might get into it um, when we get to the end when it becomes pretty clear, but it's fairly wild. Um, it will have some bearing, that revelation, on the rest of the series, but surprisingly not much. Um, if you're aware of it, it informs a lot. If you're not aware of it, it doesn't really matter. That sort of thing. So anyway, we are going to pick up, I forget how long after the fact this is. It's a while. Um, let's see. I also have to find out where I'm going to break off for today, because I don't know. I have not taken the time to set this aside yet. Okay, let's get to the end of that chapter, see how far along that is page-wise. I have a bunch of cover art for this, so I can very freely fiddle about. How many pages total? I don't want this to be 10 installments. Uh, 8 is more than enough. Where's page 50? Is it on a chapter? It is. So one of the nice things about this book is it has lots of smallish chapters. Some are very short. I think there's one or two that are like a couple pages. Yeah, we'll burn out to page 50 on the dot, actually. There's some other salient thing that I wanted to mention about the book, but I can't remember what it was. Maybe it'll come to me. Anyway, there's two maps right at the beginning of the book. I will try to remember to find them later. If I forget, somebody holler, and I'll get a. They'll be found. So it is not really the sequel you think it's going to be. Certainly, it wasn't the sequel I thought it was going to be. Once I learned that it was a sequel, I was like, oh, this is, huh. We get there in the end, though. By the time we get to the end of this volume, it's like, oh, yeah, this is definitely a follow-up to, Actually, we'll be there right off rip, but it's going to be a little strange at first. That's enough blather from me. Let's get rocking. There is, the first chapter here is basically, and none of the chapters are numbered, so I'm not going to call them by numbers. You're just going to have to assume by the dead silence for several seconds beforehand that it's a new chapter break, because I've drunk some water and I'm going into it. Each chapter starts with a quote as well, generally from in-universe characters. Oh shoot, I forgot to think of a voice for Carol. Oh boy. This is gonna probably be a little rough, because it's been a while since I read this, I regret to say. It's been like 2 years. Well, a year and a bit. So I'm having to remember back. It will start rough and get smoother, probably. All right, that is enough time for people to have tuned in, if they decided to, if they didn't, whatever. It's fine. I don't mind, as long as people enjoy them. If they don't enjoy them, I advise you go elsewhere. So I'm gonna just kind of keep doing them. But please give feedback, productive feedback if possible. All right, let's get rocking. What's up? You're catching me right at the beginning. That's what's up. The Jesus Incident by Frank Herbert and Bill Ransom.
There is a gateway to the imagination you must enter before you are conscious, and the keys to the gate are symbols. You can carry ideas through the gate, but you must carry the ideas in symbols. Raja Flattery, chaplain psychiatrist. Something went tick. He heard it quite distinctly, a metallic sound. There it went again. Tick. He opened his eyes and was rewarded with darkness, an absolute lack of radiant energy, or of receptors to detect energy. Am I blind? Tick. He could not place the source, but it was out there, wherever out there was. The air felt cold in his throat and lungs, but his body was warm. He realized that he lay very lightly on a soft surface. He was breathing. Something tickled his nose, a faint odor of pepper. Tick. He cleared his throat. Anybody there? No answer. Speaking hurt his throat. What am I doing here? The soft surface beneath him curved up around his shoulders to support his neck and head. It encased hips and legs. This was familiar. It ignited distant associations. It was... what? He felt he should know about such a surface. After all, Tick. Panic seized him. Who am I? The answer came slowly, thawed from a block of ice which contained everything he should know. I am Raja Flattery. Ice melted in a cascade of memories. I'm chaplain psychiatrist on the void ship Earthling. We... Some of the memories remained frozen. He tried to sit up, but was restrained by softly cupping bands over his chest and wrists. Now he felt connectors withdraw from the veins at his wrists. I'm in a hive tank. He had no memory of going into hibernation. Perhaps memory thawed more slowly than flesh. Interesting. But there were a few memories now, frigid in their flow, and deeply disturbing. I failed. Moonbase directed me to blow up our ship rather than let it roam space as a threat to humankind. I was to send the message capsule back to Moonbase and blow up our ship. Something had prevented him from... something... But he remembered the project now. Project Consciousness. And he, Raja Flattery, had held a key role in that project. Chaplain psychiatrist. He had been one of the crew. Umbilicus crew. He did not dwell on the birth symbology in that label. Clones had more important tasks. They were clones on the crew, all... Yes, clones on the crew. They were clones on the crew, all with Lon for a middle name. Lon meant clone, as Mac meant son of. All the crew, clones. They were doppelgangers sent far into insulating space, there to solve the problems of creating an artificial consciousness. Dangerous work. Very dangerous. Artificial consciousness had a long history of turning against its creators. It went rogue with ferocious violence. Even many of the uncloned had perished in agony. Nobody could say why. But the project's directors at Moonbase were persistent. Again and again they sent the same cloned crew into space. Features flashed into Flattery's mind as he thought the names. A Gerald Timberlake, a John Bickle, a Prue Wagand. Raja Flattery. Raja Long Flattery. He glimpsed his own face in a long-gone mirror. Fair hair, narrow features, disdainful. And the void ship carried others, many others. They carried cloned colonists, gene banks in hive tanks, cheap flesh to be sacrificed in distant explosions where the uncloned would not be harmed, cheap flesh to gather data for the uncloned. Each new venture into the void went out with a bit more information for the wakeful umbilicus crew and those encased in hive, as I am encased now. Colonists, livestock, plants, each void ship carried what it needed to create another Earth. That was the carrot luring them onward. And the ship, certain death if they failed to create an artificial consciousness. Moonbase knew that ships and clones were cheap where materials and inexpensive energy were abundant, as they were on the moon. Tick. Who is bringing me out of hibernation? And why? Flattery thought about that while he tried to extend his globe of awareness into the unresponsive darkness. Who? Why? He knew that he had failed to blow up his ship after it had exhibited consciousness, using Bickle as an imprint on the computer they had built. I did not blow up the ship. Something prevented me from... Ship. More memories flooded into his mind. They had achieved the artificial consciousness to direct their ship, and it had whisked them far across space to the Tau-Ceti system, where there were no inhabitable planets. Moonbase probes had made certain of that much earlier. No inhabitable planets. It was made part of the frustration built into the project. No void ship could be allowed to choose the long way to Tau-Ceti Sanctuary. Moonbase could not allow that. It would be too tempting for the cloned crew. Breed our own replacements. Let our descendants find Tau-Ceti. And to hell with Project Consciousness. If they voted that course, the chaplain psychiatrist was charged to expose the empty goal and stand ready with the destruct button. Win, lose, or draw, we were supposed to die. And only the chaplain psychiatrist had been allowed to suspect this. The serial void ships and their cloned cargo had one mission: gather information and send it back to Moonbase. Ship. That was it, of course. They had created much more than consciousness in their computer and its companion system, which Bickle had called the Ox. They had made Ship. And Ship had whisked them across space in an impossible eye blink. Destination Tau-Ceti. That was, after all, the built-in command, the target programmed into their computer. But where there had been no inhabitable planet, Ship had created one. A paradise planet, an Earth idealized out of every human dream. Ship had done this thing, but then had come Ship's terrible demand. You must decide how you will worship me. Ship had assumed attributes of God or Satan. Flattery was never sure which. But he had sensed that awesome power even before the repeated demand. How will you worship? You must decide. Failure. They never could satisfy Ship's demand. But they could fear. They learned a full measure of fear. Tick. He recognized that sound now, the Dehybe timer monitor counting off the restoration of life to his flesh. It's timer/monitor. Sorry. But who had set this process into motion? Who's there? Silence and the impenetrable darkness answered. Flattery felt alone, and now there was a painful chill around his flesh, a signal that skin sensation was returning to normal. One of the crew had warned them before they had thrown the switch to ignite the artificial consciousness. Flattery could not recall who had voiced the warning, but he remembered it. There must be a threshold of consciousness beyond which a conscious being takes on attributes of God. Whoever said it had seen a truth. Who is bringing me out of Hybe, and why? Somebody's there! Who is it? Speaking still hurt his throat, and his mind was not working properly, that icy core of untouchable memories. Come on! Who's there? He knew somebody was there. He could feel the familiar presence of... Ship. Okay, Ship. I'm awake. So you assume. That chiding voice could never sound human. It was too impossibly controlled. Every slightest nuance, every inflection, every modulated resonance conveyed a perfection which put it beyond the reach of humans. But that voice told him he once more was a pawn of Ship. He was a small cog in the workings of this infinite power which he had helped to release upon an unsuspecting universe. This realization filled him with remembered terrors and an immediate awesome fear of the agonies which Ship might visit upon him for his failures. He was tormented by visions of hell. I failed. I failed. I failed. St. Augustine asked the right question. Does freedom come from chance or choice? And you must remember that quantum mechanics guarantees chance. Raja Flattery, The Book of Ship. Usually, Morgan Oakes took out his nightside angers and frustrations in long strides down any corridor of the ship where his feet led him. Not this time, he told himself. He sat in shadows and sipped a glass of astringent wine. Bitter, but it washed the taste of the ship's foul joke from his tongue. The wine had come at his demand, a demonstration of his power in these times of food shortages. The first bottle from the first batch. How would they take it groundside when he ordered the wine improved? Oakes raised the glass in an ancient gesture. Confusion to you, Ship! The wine was too raw. He put it aside. Oakes knew the figure he cut, sitting here trembling in his cubby while he stared at the silent comm console beside his favorite couch. He increased the light slightly. Once more the ship had convinced him that its program was running down. The ship was getting senile. He was the chaplain psychiatrist, and the ship tried to poison him. Others were fed from shit pits. Sorry. It's not as bad as it sounds. It's worse. Others were fed from ship tits. Not frequently and not much, but it happened. Even he had been favored once, before he became CP, and he still remembered the taste. Richly satisfying. It was a little like the stuff called Burst, which Lewis had developed groundside. An attempt to duplicate elixir. Costly stuff, Burst. Wasteful. And not elixir. No, not elixir. He stared at the curved screen of the console beside him. It returned a dwarfed reflection of himself, an overweight, heavy-shouldered man in a one-piece suit of shipcloth which appeared vaguely gray in this light. His features were strong, a thick chin, wide mouth, beaked nose, and bushy eyebrows over dark eyes, a bit of silver at the temples. He touched his temples. The reduced reflection exaggerated his feeling that he had made small by Ship's treatment of him. His reflection showed him his own fear. I will not be tricked by a damn machine. The memory brought on another fit of trembling. Ship had refused him at the ship. Yes, ship tits. Uh, so that's all one word. Shiptits. And I am probably going to say shit pits more than once. That is not what it says. It is ship tits, which is somehow even weirder. The memory brought on another fit of trembling. Ship had refused him at the ship tits often enough that he understood this new message. He had stopped with Jesus Lewis at a bank of corridor ship tits. Lewis had been amused. Don't waste time with these things. The ship won't feed us. This had angered Oakes. It is my privilege to waste time. Don't you ever forget that. He had rolled up his sleeve and thrust his bare arm into the receptacle. The sensor scratched as it adjusted to his arm. He felt the stainless steel nose sniff out a suitable vein. There was the tingling prick of the test probe, then the release of the sensor. Some of the ship tits extruded plas tubes to suck on, but this one was programmed to fill a container behind a locked panel. Elixir, measured and mixed to his exact needs. The panel opened. Oakes grinned at an astounded Lewis.
Well, Oakes remembered saying, the ship finally realizes who's the boss here.
With that, he drained the container. Horrible. His body was racked with vomiting. His breath came in shallow gasps, and sweat soaked his single suit. It was over as quickly as it began. Lewis stood beside him in dumb amazement, looking at the mess Oakes had made of the corridor and his boots.
You see, Oakes gasped, you see how the ship tried to kill me?
Relax, Morgan, Lewis said. It's probably just a malfunction. I'll call a medtech for you and a repair robots for this thing.
I'm a doctor, damn it! I don't need a medtech poking around me.
Oakes held the fabric of his suit away from his body.
Then let's get you back to your cubby. We should check you out and...
Lewis broke off, looking suddenly over Oakes' shoulder.
Morgan, did you summon a repair unit?
Oakes turned to see what had caught Lewis's attention, saw one of the ship's robox units, a 1-meter oval of bronze turtle with wicked-looking tools clutched in its extensors. It was weaving drunkenly down the corridor toward them.
What do you suppose is wrong with that thing? Lewis muttered.
I think it's here to attack us,
Oakes said. He grabbed Lewis's arm.
Let's back out of here. Slow, now.
They retreated from the ship-tit station, watching the scanner eye of the robox and the waving appendages full of tools.
It's not stopping.
Oak's voice was low but cold with fear as the robox passed the ship-tit station.
We'd better run for it,
Lewis said. He spun Oakes ahead of him into a main passageway to medical. Neither man looked back until they were safely battened inside Oakes' cubby.
Ha!
Oakes thought, remembering. That had frightened even Lewis. He had gone back groundside fast enough to speed up construction of their redoubt, the place which would insulate them groundside and make them independent of this damned machine.
This ship's controlled our lives too long.
Oakes still tasted bitterness at the back of his throat. Now Lewis was incommunicado, sending notes by courier. Always something frustrating.
Damn, Lewis.
Oakes glanced around his shadowed quarters. It was nightside on the orbiting ship, and most of the crew drifted on the sea of sleep. An occasional click and buzz of servos modulating the environment were the only intrusions.
How long before ship's servos go mad? The ship,
he reminded himself. So every time they say ship without the in front, it's a capital S. It is hard to enunciate that in a way that's clear, but I will try. And they'll explain this. Also, we'll understand why he's correcting himself. Ship was a concept, a fabricated theology, a fairy tale embedded in a manufactured history which only a fool could believe.
It is a lie by which we control and are controlled.
He tried to relax into the thick cushions and once more took up the note which one of Lewis's minions had thrust upon him. The message was simple, direct, and threatening.
The ship informs us that it is sending groundside one, numeral 1, chaplain psychiatrist competent in communications. Reason, the unidentified CP will mount a project to communicate with the electrokelp. I can find no additional information about this CP, but he has to be someone new from Hybe.
Oakes crumpled the note in his fist. One CP was all this society could tolerate. The ship was sending another message to him. You can be replaced. He had never doubted that there were other chaplain psychiatrists somewhere in the ship's high reserves. No telling where those reserves might be hidden. The damned ship was a convoluted mess with secret sections and random extrusions and concealed passages which led nowhere. Colony had measured the ship's size by the occlusion shadow when it had eclipsed one of the two suns on a low passage. The ship was almost 58 kilometers long, room to hide almost anything.
But now we have a planet under us. Pandora. Groundside.
He looked at the crumpled note in his hand.
Why a note?
He and Lewis were supposed to have an infallible means of secret communication, the only two shipmen so gifted. It was why they trusted each other.
Do I really trust Lewis?
For the 5th time since receiving the note, Oakes triggered the alpha blink which activated the tiny pellet embedded in the flesh of his neck. No doubt the thing was working. He sensed the carrier wave which linked the capsule computer to his aural nerves, and there was that eerie feeling of a blank screen in his imagination. The knowledge that he was poised to experience a waking dream. Somewhere groundside, the tight band transmission should be alerting Lewis to this communication, but Lewis was not responding.
Equipment failure?
Oakes knew that was not the problem. He personally had implanted the counterpart of this pellet in Lewis's neck, had made the nerve hookups himself.
And I supervised Lewis while he made my implant.
There we go. Was the damned ship interfering? Oakes peered around at the elaborate changes he had introduced into his cubby. The ship was everywhere, of course. All of them shipside were in the ship. This cubby, though, had always been different, even before he had made his personal alterations. This was the cubby of a chaplain psychiatrist. The rest of the crew lived simply. They slept suspended in hammocks which translated the gentle swayings of the ship into sleep. Many incorporated padded pallets or cushions for those occasions that arose between men and women. That was for love, for relaxation, for relief from the long corridors of plasteel, which sometimes wound tightly around the psyche and squeezed out your breath. Breeding, though, that came under strictest ship controls. Every natural natal had to be born shipside and under the supervision of a trained obstetrics crew, the damned Natali with their air of superior abilities. Did the ship talk to them? Feed them? They never said. Oakes thought about the shipside breeding rooms. Although plush by usual cubby standards, they never seemed as stimulating as his own cubby. Even the perimeter tree domes were preferred by some, under dark bushes, on open grass. Oakes smiled. His cubby, though, this was opulent. Women had been known to gasp when first entering the vastness of it. From the core of the CP's cubby, this one had been expanded into the space of 5 cubbies.
And the damned ship never once interfered.
This place was a symbol of power. It was an aphrodisiac which seldom failed. It also exposed the lie of ship.
Those of us who see the lie control. Those who don't see it, don't.
He felt a little giddy. Effect of the Pandoran wine, he thought. It snaked through his veins and wormed into his consciousness. But even the wine could not make him sleep. At first, its peculiar sweetness and the thick warmth had promised to dull the edge of doubts that kept him pacing the nightside passages. He had lived on 3 or 4 hours' sleep each period for how long now? Annos. Annos. Oakes shook his head to clear it and felt the ripple of his jowls against his neck. Fat. He had never been supple, never selected for breeding.
Even Kingston chose to succeed him, though. First CP in history not selected by the damned ship.
Was he going to be replaced by this new CP the ship had chosen to send groundside? Oakes sighed. Lately, he knew he had turned sallow and heavy.
Too much demand on my head and not enough on my body.
Never a lack of couch partners, though. He patted the cushions at his side, remembering.
I'm 50, fat, and fermented, he thought. Where do I go from here?
The all-pervading, characterless background of the universe. This is the void. It is not object nor senses. It is the region of illusions. Caro Peniel. Buddha and Avata. Wild variety marked the naked band of people hobbling and trudging across the open plain between bulwarks of black crags. The red-orange light of a single sun beat down on them from the meridian, drawing purple shadows on the coarse sand and pebbles of the plain. Vagrant winds whisked at random dust pockets, and the band gave wary attention to these disturbances. Occasional stubby plants with glistening silver leaves aligned themselves with the sun in the path of the naked band. The band steered a course to avoid the plants. The people of the band showed only remote kinship with their human ancestry. Most of them turned to a tall companion as their leader, although this one did not walk at the point. He had ropey gray arms and a narrow head crowned by golden fuzz, the only suggestion of hair on his slender body. The head carried two golden eyes in bony extrusions at the temples, but there was no nose and only a tiny red circle of mouth. There were no visible ears, but brown skin marked the spots where ears might have been. The arms ended in supple hands, each with 3 six-jointed fingers and opposable thumb. The name Theriex was tattooed in green across his hairless chest. Beside the tall Theriex hobbled a pale and squat figure with no neck to support a hairless bulb of head. Tiny red eyes, set close to a moist hole which trembled with each breath, could stare only where the body pointed. The ears were gaping slits low at each side of the head. Fat and corded arms ended in 2 fingerless fleshy mittens. The legs were kneeless tubes without feet. Others in the band showed a similar diversity. There were heads with many eyes and some with none. There were great coned nostrils and horned ears, dancers' legs and some stumps. They numbered 41 in all, and they huddled close as they walked, presenting a tight wall of flesh to the Pandoran wilderness. Some clung to each other as they stumbled and lurched their way across the plain. Others maintained a small moat of open space. There was little conversation, an occasional grunt or moan, sometimes a plaintive question directed at Theriex.
Where can we hide, Ther? Who will take us in?
If we can get to the other sea, Theriex said, the Avata.
The Avata. Yes, the Avata.
They spoke it as a prayer. A deep, rumbling voice in the band took it up then. All human one. All Avata one. Another spoke.
There, tell us the story of Avata.
Theriex remained silent until they were all pleading.
Yes, there, tell us the story. The story, the story.
Theriex raised a ropey hand for silence. Then,
when Avata speaks of beginning, Avata speaks of rock and the brotherhood of rock. Before rock there was sea, boiling sea, and the blisters of light that boiled it. With the boiling and the cooling came the ripping of the moons, the teeth of the sea gone mad. By day all things scattered in the boil, and by night they joined in the relief of sediment, and they rested. Oh, that is not a good voice for Theriex, as we will soon learn. Theriex had a thin whistling voice, which carried over the shuffling sounds of the band's passage. He spoke to an odd rhythm which fitted itself to their march.
The suns slowed their great whirl, and the seas cooled. Some few who remained joined. Avatar knows this because it is so, but the first word of Avatar is rock.
The rock, the rock, Theriex's companions responded.
There is no growth on the run, Theriex said. Before rock, Avatar was tired, and Avatar was many, and Avatar had seen only the sea.
We must find the Avatar Sea.
But to grip a rock, Theriex said, to coil around it, and close, and lie still, that is a new dream, and a new life, untossed by the ravages of moon, untired. It was fine to leaf then, and in the new confidence of rock came the coil of power and the gas, gift of the sea.
Theriex tipped his head back to look up at the metallic blue of the sky, and, for a few paces, remained silent. Then,
Coil of power, touch of touches. Avatar captured lightning that day, curled tight around its rock, waiting out the silent centuries in darkness and in fear. Then the first spark arced into the horrible night. Rock!
once more the others responded. Rock, rock, rock.
Coil of power! Theriex repeated. Avatar knew rock before knowing self, and the second spark snapped. I! Then the third, greatest of all. I! Not rock!
Not rock.
Not rock! The others responded. The source is always with us, Theriex said, as it is through that which we are not. It is in reference that we are. It is through the other that self is known. And where there is only one, there is nothing else. From the nothing else comes no reflection of self, nothing returns. But for Avatar there was rock, and because there was rock, there was something returned, and that something was self. Thus the finite becomes infinite. One is not. But we are joined in the infinite, in the closeness out of which all matter comes. Let Avatar's rock steady you in the sea.
So I was going faint reading through that, not because of the voice, but because of how relevant that is for the entire series, really. Um, but particularly, you don't know it yet. I guess this could be constituted as spoilers, but I won't tell you how it's relevant, but it will actually be relevant. And it's like sprinkled all throughout. It's one of the things that makes this series brilliant. It's very well constructed. Particularly the third book, this is relevant for reasons that will become clear months from now when we get that far. For a time after Theriex fell silent, the band trudged and hobbled onward without complaint. There was a smell of acid burning on the whisking breezes, though, and one of the band with a sensitive nose detected this.
I smell nerve runners, he said.
A shudder ran through them, and they quickened their pace, while those at the edges scanned the plain around them with renewed caution. At the point of the band walked
At the point of the band walked a darkly furred figure with a long torso and stumpy legs, which ended in round, flat pads. The arms were slim and moved with a snake-like writhing. They ended in two-fingered hands, the fingers muscular, long and twining, as though designed to reach into strange places for mysterious reasons. The ears were motile, large and leathery under their thin coat of fur, pointing now one direction and now another. The head sat on a slender rock, presenting a markedly human face, although flattened and covered with that fine gauze of dark fur. The eyes were blue, heavy-lidded and bulging. They were glassy and appeared to focus on nothing. The plain around them, out to the crags about 10 kilometers distant, was devoid of motion now, marked only by scattered extrusions of black rock, and the stiff-leaved plants making their slow phototropic adjustments to the passage of the red-orange sun. The ears of the furred figure at the point suddenly stretched out, cupped and aimed at the crags directly ahead of the band. Abruptly, a screeching cry echoed across the plain from that direction. The band stopped as a single organism, caught in fearful waiting. The cry had been terrifyingly loud to carry that far across the plain. A near hysterical voice called from within the band. "We have no weapons!" "Rocks," Theriax said, waving an arm at the extruded black shapes all around. "They're too big to throw," someone complained. "The rocks of the Avata," Theriax said, and his voice carried the tone he had used while lulling his band with the story of Avata. "Stay away from the plants," someone warned. There was no real need for this warning. They all knew about the plants. Most poisonous, all capable of slashing soft flesh. 3 of the band already had been lost to the plants. Again that cry pierced the air. "The rocks," Theriax repeated. Slowly the band separated, singly and in small groups, moving out to the rocks where they huddled up to the black surfaces, clinging there, most of them with faces pressed against the darkness. "I see them," Theriax said. "Hooded dashers." All turned then to look where Theriax looked. "Rock, the dream of life," Theriax said. "To grip rock, to coil around it, close and lie still." As he spoke, he continued to stare across the plain at the 9 black shapes hurtling toward him. Hooded dashers, yes, many-legged, with enfolding hoods instead of mouths. The hoods retracted to reveal thrashing fangs. They moved with terrifying speed.
"We should have taken our chances at the redoubt with the others,"
someone wailed.
Damn you, Jesus Lewis,
Someone shouted.
damn you!
They were the last fully coherent words from the band as the hooded dashers charged at blurring speed onto its scattered members. Teeth slashed, claws raked. The speed of the attack was merciless. Hoods retracted, the dashers darted and whirled. No victim had a second chance. Some tried to run and were cut down on the open plain. Some tried to dodge around the rocks, but were cornered by pairs of demons. It was over in blinks, and the 9 dashers set to feeding. Things groped from beneath the rocks to share the feast. Even nearby plants drank red liquid from the ground. While the dashers fed, subtle movements changed the craggy skyline to the north. Great floating orange bags lifted above the rocky bulwarks there and drifted on the upper winds toward the dashers. The floaters trailed long tendrils which occasionally touched the plain, stirring up dust. The dashers saw this, but showed no fear. High, wavering crests rippled along the tops of the bags, adjusting to the wind. A piping song could be heard from them now, like wind through sails accompanied by a metallic rattling. When the orange bags were still several kilometers distant, one of the dashers barked a warning. It stared away from the bags at a boil of stringy tendrils disturbing the plane about 50 meters off. A strong smell of burning acid wafted from the boil. As one, the 9 dashers whirled and fled. The one which had fed on Theriax uttered a high scream as it raced across the plain, and then, quite clearly, it called out,
Theriax! Theriax!
There we go, that's better.
A deliberately poor move chosen at random along the line of plan can completely change the theoretical structure of a game.
Bickle quote, Ship Records. Oakes paced his cubby, fretting. It had been several night-side hours since he had last tried to contact Lewis on their implanted communicators. Lewis definitely was out of touch. Could it be something wrong at the redoubt? Oakes doubted this. The finest materials were going into that base out on Black Dragon. Lewis was sparing nothing in the construction. It would be impenetrable by any force known to Pandora or shipmen. Any force except... Oakes stopped his pacing, scanned the plasteel walls of his cubby. Would the redoubt down on Pandora really insulate them from the ship? The wine he had drunk earlier was beginning to relax him, clearing the bitter taste from his tongue. His room felt stuffy and isolated even from the ship. Let the damned ship send another CP groundside. Whoever it was would be taken care of in due course. Oakes let his body sag onto a couch and tried to forget the latest attack on him by the ship. He closed his eyes and drifted in a half-dream back to his beginning.
Not quite. Not quite the beginning.
He did not like to admit the gap. There were things he did not remember. Doubts intruded, and the carrier wave of the pellet in his neck distracted him. He sent the nerve signal to turn the thing off.
Let Lewis try to contact me.
Oakes heaved an even deeper sigh.
Not the beginning. No.
There were things about his beginnings that the records did not show. The ship with all the powers of a god would not or could not provide a complete background on Morgan Oakes. And the CP was supposed to have access to everything. Everything. Everything except that distant origin somewhere Earthside, back on faraway Earth. Long gone Earth. He knew he had been 6 when his first memory images gelled and stayed with him. He even knew the year, 6001, dating from the birth of the divine Imhotep. Spring. Yes, it had been spring, and he had been living in the power center, in Egypt, the beautiful city of Heliopolis. From the Briton March to the underlands of Ind, all was Greco-Roman peace, fed by the Nile's bounty. It's Grae. Everything is subtly misspelled. There will be explanations for this eventually. All was Greco-Roman peace, fed by the Nile's bounty and enforced by hired troopers of Egypt. Only in the outlands of Chine and the continents of East Chin, far across the Nisian Sea, were there open conflicts of nations. East Chine. Or Chin. Whatever. Yes, spring. And he had been living with his parents in Heliopolis. Both of his parents were on assignment with the military. This he knew from the records. His parents were perhaps the finest geneticists in the Empire. They were training for a project that was to take over young Morgan's life completely. They were preparing a trip to the stars. This, too, he was told. But that had been many years later, and too late for him to object. What he remembered was a man, a black man. He liked to imagine him one of the dark priests of Egypt that he watched every week on the viewer. The man walked past Morgan's quarters every afternoon. Where he went and why he went only one way, Morgan never knew. The fence around his parents' quarters was much higher than the black man's head. It was a mesh of heavy steel curved outwards and down at the top. Every afternoon Morgan watched the man walk by, and tried to imagine how the man came to be black. Morgan did not ask his parents because he wanted to figure it out for himself. One morning, at early, his father said,
The sun's going nova.
he never forgot those words, those powerful words, even though he did not know their meaning.
It's been kept quiet, but even the Roman Empire can't hide this heat. All the chants of all the priests of Ra won't make one damn whit of difference.
Heat, his mother shot back, heat is something you can live in, you can deal with. But this, she waved her hand at the large window, this is only a step away from fire.
So, he thought, it was the sun that made that man black.
That's how he sounded like as a kid, too. He was 10 before he realized that the man who walked past was black from birth, from conception. Still, Morgan persisted in telling the other children in his creche that it was the sun's doing. He enjoyed the secret game of persuasion and deception.
Ah, the power of the game, even then.
Oakes straightened the cushion at his back. Why did he think of that black man now? There had been one curious event, a simple thing that caused a commotion and fixed it in his memory.
He touched me.
Oakes could not recall being touched by anyone except his parents until that moment. On that very hot day he sat outside on a step, cooled by the shade of the roof and the ventilator trained on his back from the doorway. The man walked by, as usual, then stopped and turned back. The boy watched him, curious, as though noticing him for the first time. Oakes recalled the sudden jump of his heart, that feeling of a slingshot pulled back. The man looked around, then up at the top of the fence, and the next thing Oakes knew the man was over the top, walking up to him. The black man stopped, reached out a hesitant hand, and touched the boy's cheek. Oakes also reached out, equally curious, and touched the black skin of the man's arm.
Haven't you ever seen a little boy before?
He asked. The black face widened into a smile, and he said,
Yes, but not a little boy like you.
Then a sentry jumped on the man out of nowhere and took him away. Another sentry pulled the boy inside and called his father. He remembered that his father was angry. But best of all, he remembered the look of wide-eyed wonder on the black man's face, the man who never walked by again. Oakes felt special then, powerful, an object of deference. He had always been someone to reckon with.
Why do I remember that man?
It seemed as though he spent all of his private hours asking himself questions lately. Questions led to more questions, led ultimately, daily, to the one question that he refused to admit into his consciousness. Until now. He voiced the question aloud to himself, tested it on his tongue like the long-awaited wine.
What if the damned ship is God?
Human hibernation is to animal hibernation. Human hibernation is HY burnation. Is to animal hibernation, HI. Human hibernation is to animal hibernation as animal hibernation is to constant wakefulness. In its reduction of life processes, hibernation approached absolute stasis. It is nearer death than life. Dictionary of Science, 101st edition. Raja Flattery lay quietly on the hibernation cocoon while he fought to overcome his terrors. Ship has me. Moody waves confused his memories, but he knew several things. He could almost project these things onto the ebon blackness which surrounded him. I was the chaplain psychiatrist on the void ship Earthling. We were supposed to produce... Oh, that's not italicized. I'm going to assume that's supposed to be italicized. We were supposed to produce an artificial consciousness. Very dangerous, that. And they had produced something. That something was Ship, a being of seemingly infinite powers. God or Satan? Flattery did not know. But Ship had created a paradise planet for its cargo of clones, and then had introduced a new concept. Warship. It had demanded that the human clones decide how they would worship. We failed in that, too. Was it because they were clones, every one of them? They had certainly been expendable. They had known this from the first moments of their childhood awareness on Moonbase. Again, fear swept through him. I must be resolute, Flattery told himself. God or Satan, whatever this power may be, I'm helpless before it unless I remain resolute. As long as you believe yourself helpless, you remain helpless even though resolute, Ship said. So you read my mind, too. Read? That is hardly the word. Ship's voice came from the darkness all around him. It conveyed a sense of remote concerns which Flattery could not fathom. Every time Ship spoke, he felt himself reduced to a mote. He combed his way through a furry sense of subjugation, but every thought amplified this feeling of being caged and inadequate. What could a mere human do against a power such as Ship? There were questions in his mind, though, and he knew that Ship sometimes answered questions. How long have I been in Hybe? That length of time would be meaningless to you. Try me. I am trying you. Tell me how long I've been in Hybe. The words were barely out of his mouth before he felt panic at what he had done. You did not address God that way, or Satan. Why not, Raj? Why not, Raj? Ship's voice had taken on an air of camaraderie, but so precise was the modulation, his flesh tingled with it. Because of what I could do to you? Yes. Ah, Raj, when will you awaken? I am awake. No matter. You have been in hibernation for a very long time, as you reckon time. How long? He felt that the answer was deeply important. He had to know. You must understand about replays, Raj. Earth has gone through its history for me, replayed itself at my command. Replayed? The same way every time? Most of the times. Flattery felt the inescapable truth of it, and a cry was torn from him. Why? You would not understand. All of that pain and the joy, Raj. Never forget the joy. But replay? The way you might replay a musical recording, Raj, or a holo record of a classical drama. The way Moonbase replayed its Project Consciousness, getting a bit more out of it each time. Getting a bit more out of it each time. Why have you brought me out of Hybe? You are like a favorite instrument, Raj. But Bickle,
Oh, Bickle. Yes, he gave me his genius. He was the black box out of which you achieved me. But friendship requires more, Raj. You are my best friend.
I would have destroyed you, ship.
How little you understand friendship.
So I'm an instrument. Are you replaying me?
No, Raj. No.
Such sadness in that terrible voice.
Instruments play.
Why should I permit you to play me?
Good. Very good, Raj.
Is that supposed to be an answer?
That was approval. You are indeed my best friend, my favorite instrument.
I'll probably never understand that.
It's partly because you enjoy the play.
Flattery could not suppress it. A chuckle escaped him.
Laughter suits you, Raj.
Laughter?
He remembered little laughter except the bitter amusement of self-accusation. But now he remembered going into hide, not once, but more times than he cared to count. There had been other awakenings, other games, and, yes, other failures. He sensed, though, that Ship was amused, and he knew he was supposed to respond.
What are we playing this time?
My demands remain unfulfilled, Raj. Humans somehow cannot decide how to worship. That's why there are no more humans now.
He felt frigid cold all through his body.
No more. What have you done?
Earth has vanished into the cosmic whirl, Raj. All the Earths are gone. A long time, remember. Now there are only shipmen and you.
Me, human?
You are original material.
A clone, a doppelganger, original material?
Very much so.
What are shipmen?
They are survivors from the most recent replays, slightly different replays from the Earth which you recall.
Not human?
You could breed with them.
How are they different?
They have similar ancestral experiences to yours, but they were picked up at different points in their social development.
Flattery sensed confusion in this answer and made a decision not to probe it. Not yet. He wanted to try another tack.
What do you mean they were picked up?
They thought of it as a rescue. In each instance, their son was about to nova.
More of your doing?
They have been prepared most carefully for your arrival, Raj.
How have they been prepared?
They have a chaplain psychiatrist who teaches hate. They have Cy Murdoch, who has learned the lesson well. They have a woman named Hamill, whose extraordinary strength goes deeper than anyone suspects. They have an old man named Ferry, who believes everything can be bought. They have Wayla, and she is worthy of careful attention. They have a young poet named Caro Panil, and they have Hallie Eckel, who thinks she wants the poet. They have people who have been cloned and engineered for strange occupations. They have hungers, fears, joys.
You call that preparation?
Yes, and I call it involvement.
Which is what you want from me.
Involvement, yes.
Give me one compelling reason I should go down there.
I do not compel such things.
Not a responsive answer, but Flattery knew he would have to accept it.
So I'm to arrive. Where and how?
There is a planet beneath us. Most shipmen are on that planet. Colonists.
And they must decide how they are supposed to warship.
You are still perceptive, Raj.
What did they say when you put that question to them?
I have not put this question to them. That, I hope, will be your task.
Flattery shuddered. He knew that game. It was in him to shout a refusal, to rage and invite Ship's worst reprisal. But something in this dialogue held his tongue. What happens if they fail?
I break the recording.
Dig your stubborn heels firm into dirt, and where is the dirt going? Caro Peniel, The Collected Poems. Caro Peniel finished the last briefing on Pandoran geology and switched off his holo. It was well past the hour of mid-meal, but he felt no hunger. Ship's air tasted stale in the tiny teaching cubby, and this surprised him until he realized he had sealed off the secret hatch into this place, leaving only the floor vent. I've been sitting on the floor vent. This amused him. He stood and stretched, recalling the lessons of the holo. Dreams of real dirt, real seas, real air had played so long in his imagination that he feared now the real thing might disappoint him. He knew himself to be no novice at image building in his mind, and no novice to the disappointments of reality. At such times he felt much older than his 20 annos, and he looked for reassurance in a shiny surface to reflect his own features. He found a small area of the hatch plate polished by the many passages of his own hand when entering this place. Yes, his dark skin retained the smoothness of youth, and the darker beard curled with its usual vigor around his mouth. He had to admit it was a generous mouth. And the nose was a pirate's nose. Not many shipmen even knew there had ever been such people as pirates. His eyes appeared much older than 20, though. No escaping that. Ship did that to me. No. He shook his head. Honesty could not be evaded. The special thing Ship and I have between us, that made my eyes look old. There were realities within realities. This thing that made him a poet kept him digging beneath every surface like a child pawing through pages of glyphs. Even when reality disappointed, he had to seek it. The power of disappointment. He recognized that power as distinct from frustration. It contained the power to regroup, rethink, react. It forced him to listen to himself as he listened to others. Caro knew what most people shipside thought about him. They were convinced he could hear every conversation in a crowded room, that no gesture or inflection escaped him. There were times when that was true, but he kept to himself his conclusions about such observations. Thus few were offended by his attentions. No one could find a better audience than Caro Peniel. All he wanted was to listen, to learn, to make order out of it in his poems. It was order that mattered, beautiful order created out of the deepest inspiration. Yet, he had to admit it, Ship presented an image of infinite disorder. He had asked Ship to show its shape to him once, a whimsical request which he had half expected to be refused. But Ship had responded by taking him on a visual tour through the internal sensors, through the eyes of the Robox repair units, and even through the eyes of shuttles flitting between Ship and Pandora. Externally, Ship was most confusing. Great fan-like extrusions dangled in space like wings or fins. Lights glittered within them, and there were occasional glimpses of people at work behind the open shutters of the ports. Hydroponics gardens, Ship had explained. Ship stretched almost 58 kilometers in length, but it bulged and writhed throughout that length with fragile shapes which gave no clue to their purposes. Shuttles landed and were dispatched from long, slender tubes jutting randomly outward. The hydroponics fans were stacked one upon another, built outward from each other like mad growths springing from mutated spores. Peniel knew that once Ship had been sleek and trim, a projectile shape with 3 slim wings at the midpoint. The wings had dipped backward to form a landing tripod. That sleek shape lay hidden now within the confusion of the eons. It was called the Core, and you caught occasional glimpses of it in the passages. A thick wall with an airtight hatch, a stretch of metallic surface with ports which opened onto the blank barriers of new construction. Internally, Ship was equally confusing. Sensor eyes showed him the stacks of dormant life in the hibernation bays. At his request, Ship displayed the locator coordinates, but they were meaningless to him. Numbers and glyphs. He followed the swift movements of Robox units down passages where there was no air, and out onto Ship's external skin. There, in the shadows of the random extrusions, he watched the business of repairs and alterations, even the beginnings of new construction. Peniel had watched his fellow shipmen at their work, feeling fascinated and faintly guilty. A secret spy intruding on privacy. Two men had wrestled a large tubular container into a loading bay for shuttle transshipment down to Pandora, and Peniel had felt that he had no right to watch this without the two men knowing it. When the tour was over, he had sat back disappointed. It occurred to him then that Ship intruded this way all the time. Nothing any shipman did could be hidden from Ship. This realization had sparked a momentary resentment, which was followed immediately by amusement. I am in Ship and of Ship, and in a deeper sense I am Ship. Kero! The sudden voice from the comm console beneath his holo focus startled him. How had she found him here? Yes, Allie? Where are you? Ah, she had not found him. A search program had found him. I'm studying, he said. Can you walk with me for a while? I'm really wound up. Where? How about the arboretum near the cedars? Give me a few minutes to finish up here and I'll meet you. I'm not bothering you, am I? He noted the diffidence in her tone. No, I need a break. See you outside of records. He heard the click of her sign-off and stood a blink staring at the console. How did she know I was studying in the records section? A search program keyed to his person would not report his location. Am I that predictable? He picked up his note case and recorder and stepped through the concealed hatch. He sealed it and slipped down through the software storage area to the nearest passage. Hallie Eckel stood in the passageway beside the hatch waiting for him. She waved a hand, all nonchalance. Hi. Most of his mind was still back in the study. He blinked at her foolishly, mindful as usual of the sheer beauty of Hallie Eckel. At times like this, meeting suddenly, unexpectedly in some passage, she often stunned him. The clinical sterility of the ever-present Prybox at her hip never distanced them. She was a medtech full-time, and he understood that life and survival were her business. The secret darkness of her eyes, her thick black hair, the lustrous brown warmth of her skin always made him lean toward her slightly or face her way in a crowded room. They were from the same bloodlines, the Nesian nations, selected for strength, survival sense, and their easy affinity with the highways of the stars. Many mistook them for brother and sister, a mistake amplified by the fact that true siblings had not existed shipside in living memory. Some siblings slept on in Hybe, but none walked together. Notes toward a poem flashed behind his eyes, another of the many she brought to his mind, that he kept to himself. O dark and magnificent star, what little light I have, take. Weave those supple fingers into mine. Feel the flow. Before he could think of putting this into his recorder, it occurred to him that she should not be here so fast. There were no nearby call stations. Where were you when you called me? Medical. He glanced up the passage. Medical was at least 10 minutes away. But how did you... Keyed the whole conversation on a 10-minute delay. But... See how standard you are on comm? I can tape my whole side of a conversation with you. Oh. Oh, there's a misplaced comma. That's okay. See how standard you are on comm? I can tape my whole side of a conversation with you and get it right down the line. But the... He nodded at the hatch into the software storage. Oh, that's where you always are when nobody can find you. Somewhere in there. Somewhere in there. She pointed to the storage area. Hmm. He took her hand as they headed out toward the west shell. Why so thoughtful? She asked. I thought you'd be amused, surprised, laugh or something. I'm sorry. Lately it's bothered me when I do that. Never take time for people, never seem to have the flair for the right word at the right time. A pretty strong self-indictment for a poet. It's much easier to order characters on a page or a holo than it is to order one's life. One's life. Why do I talk that way? She slipped an arm around his waist and hugged him as they walked. He smiled. Presently they emerged into the dome of trees. It was dayside, the sunglow of Riga muted through the screening filters. All the greens came with soothing blue undertones. Caro took a deep breath of the oxygenated air. He heard birds twittering behind a sona barrier off in heavier bushes to the left. Other couples could be seen far down through the trees. This was a favorite trysting place. Hallie slipped off her prybox strap and pulled him down beside her under a cover of cedar. The needle duff was warm and soft, the air thick with moisture, and sun dazzled through the branches. They stretched out on their backs, shoulder to shoulder. Hallie stretched and arched her back. It smells so nice here. It? What's the smell of an it? Oh, stop that. She turned toward him. You know what I mean. The air, the moss, the food in your beard. She brushed at his whiskers, wove her fingers in and out of the coarse hairs. You're the only shipman with a beard. So I'm told. Do you like it? I don't know. He reached out and traced the curve of the small wire ring which pierced her left nostril. Traditions are strange. Where did you get this ring? A Roebuck's dropped it. Dropped it? He was surprised. I know. They don't miss much. This one was repairing a sensor outside that little medical study next to behavioral. I saw the wire drop and picked it up. It was like finding a rare treasure. They leave so little around. Ship only knows what they do with all the scraps they carry off. She slipped her arm around his neck and kissed him. Presently she pulled back. He pulled away from her and sat up. Thanks, but... It's always thanks, but... She was angry, fighting the physical evidence of her own passion. I'm not ready. He felt apologetic. I don't know why, and I'm not playing with you. I just have this compulsion toward timing, for the feeling of rightness in things. What could be more right? We were selected as a breeding pair after knowing each other after all this time. It's not like we were strangers. He could not bring himself to look at her. I know, anyone shipside can partner with anyone else, but... But! She whirled away and stared at the base of the sheltering tree. Who we could be a breeding pair! One pair in what? 2,000? We could actually make a child. It isn't that, it's... And you're always so damned historical, traditional, quoting social patterns this and language patterns that. Why can't you see what... He reached across her, put his fingers over her mouth to silence her, and gently kissed her cheek. Dear Hallie, because I can't. For me, partnership will have to be a giving so deep that I lose myself in the giving. She rolled away and lifted her head to stare at him, her eyes glistening. Where do you get such ideas? They come out of my living and from what I learn. Ship teaches you these things? Ship does not deny me what I want to know. She stared morosely at the ground under her feet. Ship won't even talk to me. Her voice was barely audible. When you ask in the right way, Ship always answers, he said. Then, an afterthought as he sensed it between them, and you have to listen. You've said that before, but you never tell me how. There was no evading the jealousy in her voice. He found that he could only answer in one way. "I will give you a poem," he said. He cleared his throat. "Blue itself teaches us blue." She scowled, concentrating on his words. Presently she shook her head. "I'll never understand you any more than I understand ship. I go to worship, I pray, I do what ship directs." She stared at him. "I never see you at worship." "Ship is my friend," he said. Curiosity overcame her resentments. "What does ship teach you?" "Too many things to tell here." "Just give me one thing, just one." He nodded. "Very well. There have been many planets and many people. Their languages and the chronicle of their years weave a magic tangle. Their words sing to me. You don't even have to understand the words to hear them sing." She felt an odd sense of wonder at this. "Ship gives you the words and you don't understand?" "When I ask for the original." "But why do you want words that you don't understand?" "To make those people live, to make them mine. Not to own them, but to become them, at least for a blink or two." He turned and stared at her. "Haven't you ever wanted to dig in ancient dirt and find people nobody else even knew existed? Their bones? No, their hearts, their lives." She shook her head slowly. "I just don't understand you, Kero, but I love you." He nodded silently. "Yes," thinking, "yes, love doesn't have to understand. She knows this, but she won't let it get into her life. But she won't let it into her life." He recalled the words of an old Earthside poem. "Love is not a consolation, it is a light." The thought, the poem of life, that was consolation. He would talk to her of love sometime, he thought, but not this dayside. "Why are you humans always so ready to carry the terrible burdens of your past?" Caro Panil. Questions from the Avata. Cy Murdoch did not like coming out this close to colony perimeter, even when sheltered behind the crysteel barrier of Lab 1's private exit. Creatures of this planet had a way of penetrating the impenetrable, confounding the most careful defenses. But someone Lewis trusted had to man this observation post when the highlighters congregated on the plain as they were doing this morning. It was their most mysterious form of behavior, and lately Lewis had been demanding answers. No doubt jumping to commands from the boss. He sighed. When he looked out on the unprotected surface of Pandora, there was no denying its immediate dangers. Absently, he scratched his left elbow. When he moved his head against the exterior light, he could see his own reflection in the Plaz. A blocky man with brown hair, blue eyes, a light complexion which he kept meticulously scrubbed. The vantage point was not the best available, not as good as the exterior posts which were always manned by the fastest and best that the colony could risk. But Murdoch knew he could argue his importance to the leadership team. He was not expendable, and this place did serve Lewis's purpose. The crysteel barrier, although it filtered out almost a fourth of the light, framed the area they needed to watch. What was it those damned floating gas bags did out there? Murdoch crouched behind a swivel-mounted scope Oh, there's not an extra hyphen there. Okay, weird. And there's a line break in the middle of the word. Murdoch crouched behind a swivel-mounted scope-cum-vidicorder and touched the controls with a short, stubby finger to focus on the lighters. More than 100 of them floated above the plain about 6 kilometers out. There were some big orange monsters in this mob, and Murdoch singled out one of the biggest for special observation, reading what he saw into a small recorder at his throat. The big lighter looked to be at least 50 meters in diameter, a truncated sphere somewhat flattened along the top which formed the muscular base for the tail. For the tall, rippling sail membrane. Sorry, not tail. A truncated sphere looking. Jeez. My eyes are skipping lines. A truncated sphere, somewhat flattened along the top, which formed the muscular base for the tall, rippling sail membrane. Corded tendrils trailed down to the plain where it grasped a large rock, which bumped and dragged along the surface, kicking up dust, scattering gravel. The morning was cloudless, only one sun in the sky. It cast a harsh golden light on the plain, picking out every wrinkle and contraction of the lighter's bag. Murdoch could make out a cradle of smaller enfolding tentacles cupped beneath the lighter, confining something which squirmed there, twisting, flailing. He could not quite identify what the lighter carried, but it definitely was alive and trying to escape. The mob of accompanying lighters had lined out in a great curved spread which was sweeping now across the plain on a diagonal path away from Murdoch's observation post. The big one he had singled out anchored the near flank, still confining that flailing something in the tentacle shadows beneath it. What had that damned thing captured? Surely not a colonist. Murdoch backed off his focus to include the entire mob, and saw then that they were targeting on ground creatures, a mixed lot of them, huddled on the plain. The arc of highlighters swept toward the crouching animals which waited mesmerized. He scanned them, identifying hooded dashers, swift grazers, flatwings, spinnerets, tube tuckers, clingies, demons, all of them deadly to colonists, but apparently not dangerous to highlighters. All of the lighters carried ballast rocks, Murdoch saw, and now the central segment of the sweeping arc dropped their rocks. The bags bounced slightly, and tendrils stretched out to snatch up the crouching demons. The captive creatures squirmed and flailed, but made no attempt to bite or otherwise attack the lighters. Now, all but a few of the ballasted lighters dropped their rocks and began to soar. The few still carrying rocks tacked out away from the capture team, appearing to search the ground for other specimens. The monster bag, which Murdoch had studied earlier, remained in this search group. Once more, Murdoch enlarged the image in the scope, focusing in on the cupped tendrils beneath the thing's bag. All was quiet there now, and, as he watched, the tendrils opened to release their catch. Murdoch dictated his observations into the recorder at his throat.
The big one has just dropped its catch. Whatever it is appears to be desiccated, a large flat area of black. My God, it was a hooded dasher. The big lighter had a hooded dasher tucked up under the bag.
The remains of the dasher struck the ground in a geyser of dust. Now the big lighter swerved left, and its rock ballast scraped the side of another large rock on the plain. Sparks flew where the rocks met, and Murdoch saw a line of fire spurt upward to the lighter, which exploded in a flare of glowing yellow. Bits of the orange bag and a cloud of fine blue dust drifted and sailed all around. The explosion ignited a wild frenzy of action on the plain. The other bags dropped their captives and soared upward. The demons on the ground spread out, some dashing and leaping to catch the remnants of the exploded lighter. Slower creatures, such as the spinnerets, crept toward the fallen rags of the orange bag. And when it was over, the demons sped away or burrowed into the plain, as was the particular habit of each. Murdoch methodically described this into his recorder. When it was done, he scanned the plain once more. All of the lighters had soared away. Not a demon remained. He shut down the observation post and signaled for a replacement to come up. Then he headed back down toward Lab 1 and the garden. As he made his way along the more secure lighted passages, he thought about what he had seen and recorded. The visual record would go to Lewis and later to Oakes. Lewis would edit the verbal observations, adding his own comments.
What was it I saw and recorded out there?
Try as he might to understand the behavior of the Pandoran creatures, Murdoch could not do it.
Lewis is right. We should just wipe 'em out.
And as he thought of Lewis, Murdoch asked himself how long this most recent emergency at the redoubt would keep the man out of touch. For all they really knew, Lewis might be dead. No one was completely immune to the threats of Pandora, not even Lewis. If Lewis were gone... Murdoch tried to imagine himself elevated to a new position of power under Oaks. The images of such a change would not form.
Gods have plans too.
Morgan Oakes, The Diaries. For a long time, Peniel lay quietly beside Hallie in the tree dome, watching the plas-filtered light draw radial beams on the air above the cedar tree. He knew Hallie had been hurt by his rejection, and he wondered why he did not feel guilty. He sighed. There was no sense in running away. This was the way he had to be. Hallie spoke first, her voice low, tentative. Nothing's changed, has it? Nothing's changed, is it? Talking about it doesn't change it, he said. Why did you ask me out here? To revive our sexual debate? Couldn't I just want to be with you for a while? She was close to tears. He spoke softly to avoid hurting her even more. I'm always with you, Hallie. With his left hand, he lifted her right hand, pressed the tips of his fingers against the tips of her fingers. Here, we touch, right? She nodded like a child being coaxed from a tantrum. Which is we and which the material of our flesh? I don't... He held their fingertips a few centimeters apart. All the atoms between us oscillate at incredible speeds. They bump into each other and shove each other around. He tapped the air with a fingertip, careful to keep from touching her. So I touch an atom. It bumps into the next one. That one nudges another, and so on until... He closed the gap and brushed her fingertips. We touch, and we were never separate. Those are just words. She pulled her hand away from him. Much more than words, you know it, med-tech Halley-Eckle. We constantly exchange atoms with the universe, with the atmosphere, with food, with each other. There's no way we can be separated. But I don't want just any atoms. You have more choice than you think, lovely Hallie. She studied him out of the corners of her eyes. Are you just making these things up to entertain me? I'm serious. Don't I always tell you when I make up something? Do you? Always, Hallie. I will make up a poem to prove it. He tapped her wire ring lightly. A poem about this. Why are you telling me your poems? You usually just lock them up on tapes or store them away in those old-fashioned glyph books of yours. I'm trying to please you in the only way I can. Then tell me your poem. He brushed her cheek beside the ring. Then, with delicate rings of the gods in our noses, we do not root in their garden. Oh boy. So, to all my Aussies out there, I believe you know that rooting has a slightly different meaning, which is kind of yes, here we go. There's multiple layers of meaning there. She stared at him, puzzled. I don't understand. An ancient Earthside practice. Farmers put rings in the noses of their pigs to keep the pigs from digging out of their pans. Pigs dig with their noses as well as their feet. People called that kind of digging rooting. So you're comparing me to a pig. Is that all you see in my poem? She sighed, then smiled as much at herself as at Caro. We're a fine pair to be selected for breeding, the poet and the pig. He stared at her, met her gaze. Without knowing why, they were suddenly giggling, then laughing. Presently he lay back on the duff.
Ah, Hallie, you are good for me. I thought you might need some distraction. What have you been studying that keeps you so shut away? He scratched his head, recovered a brown twig of dead cedar. I've been rooting into the electrokelp. That seaweed the colony's been having all the trouble with? Why would that interest you? I'm always amazed at what interests me, but this may be right down my hatchway. The kelp, or some phase of it, appears to be sentient. You mean it thinks? More than that. Probably much more. Why hasn't this been announced? I don't know for sure. I came across part of the information by accident and pieced together the rest. There's a record of other teams sent out to study the kelp. How did you find this report? Well, I think it may be restricted for most people, but Ship seldom holds anything back from me. You and Ship? Hallie. Oh, all right. What's in this report? The kelp appears to have a language transmitted by light, but we can't understand it yet. And there's something even more interesting. I can't find out if there's a current project to contact and study this kelp. Doesn't Ship? Ship refers me to Colony HQ or to the CP, but they don't acknowledge my inquiries. That's nothing new. They don't acknowledge most inquiries. You've been having trouble with them too? Just that medical can't get an explanation for all the gene sampling. Gene sampling? How very curious. Oakes is a very curious and very private person. How about someone on the staff? Lewis? Her tone was derisive. Caro scratched his cheek reflectively. Electrokelp and gene sampling. Hallie, I don't know about the gene sampling. That has a peculiar stink to it. But the kelp. She interrupted, excited. This creature could have a soul, and it could worship. A soul? Perhaps. But I thought when I saw that record, yes, this is why Ship brought us to Pandora. What if Oakes knows that the electrokelp is the reason we're here? Peniel shook his head. She gripped his arm. Think of all the times Oakes has called us prisoners of Ship. He tells us often enough that Ship won't let us leave. Why won't he tell us why Ship brought us here? Maybe he doesn't know. Oh, he knows. Well, what can we do about it? She spoke without thinking. We can't do anything without going groundside. He pulled his arm away from her and dug his fingers into the humus. What do we know about living groundside? What do we know about living here? Would you go down to the colony with me, Hallie? You know I would, but then let's apply for. They won't let me go. The groundside food shortage is critical. There are health problems. They've just increased our workload because they've sent some of our best people down. We're probably imagining monsters that don't exist, but I'd still like to see the electrokelp for myself. A high-pitched hum blurted from the ever-present pry box on the ground beside Hallie. She pressed the response key.
Hallie,
There was a clatter, a buzz. Presently the voice returned.
sorry I dropped you. This is Winslow Ferry. Is that Carol Peniel with you, Hallie?
Hallie stifled a laugh. The bumbling old fool could not even put in a call without stumbling over something. Caro was caught by the direct reference to someone being with Hallie. Had Ferry been listening? Many shipsides suspected that sensors and portable communications equipment had been adapted for eavesdropping, but this was his first direct clue. He took the pry box from her. This is Caro Peniel.
Caro, please report to my office within the hour. We have an assignment for you.
An assignment? There was no response. The connection had been broken. What do you suppose that's all about? Hallie asked. For answer, Caro drew a blank page from his notebook, scribbled on it with a fade stylus, then pointed it to the pry box. He was listening to us. She stared at the note. Caro said, Isn't that strange? I've never had an assignment before, except study assignments from Ship. Hallie took the stylus from him, wrote, Look out. If they do not want it known that the kelp thinks, you could be in danger.
Caro stood, blanked the page, and restored it to his case. Guess I'd better wander down to Ferry's office and find out what's happening. They walked most of the way back in silence, intensely aware of every sensor they passed, of the pry box at Hallie's hip. As they approached medical, she stopped him. Carol, teach me how to speak to ship. Can't. But it's like your genotype or your color. Except for certain clones, you don't get much choice in the matter. Ship has to decide? Isn't that always the way, even with you? Do you respond to everyone who wants to talk to you? Well, I know Ship must be very busy with. I don't think that has anything to do with it. Ship either speaks to you or doesn't. She digested this for a moment, nodded, then, Carol, do you really talk to Ship? There was no mistaking the resentment in her voice. You know I wouldn't lie to you, Hallie. Why are you so interested in talking to Ship? It's the idea of Ship answering you, not the commands we get over the coders, but a kind of unlimited encyclopedia. That, yes, but more. Does Ship talk to you through the coders? Not very often. What is it like when... It's like a very distinctive voice in your head, just a bit clearer than your conscience. That's it? She sounded disappointed. What did you expect? Trumpets and bells? I don't even know what my conscience sounds like. Keep listening. He brushed a finger against her ring, kissed her quickly, brotherly, then stepped through the hatch into the screening area for Ferry's office. The fearful are often holders of the most dangerous power. They become demoniac when they see the workings of all the life around them. Seeing the strengths as well as the weaknesses, they fasten only on the weaknesses. Ship quotes. Winslow Ferry sat in his dimly lighted office unaware of the random chaos around him. The piles of tapes and software, the dirty clothes, the empty bottles and boxes, the papers with scribbled notes to himself. It had been a long, tense dayside for him, and the place smelled of stale, spilled wine and old perspiration. His entire attention focused on the sensor screen at the corner of his comm desk. He bent his sweaty face close to the screen, which showed Peniel walking down a passageway with that lithe and succulent medtech, Hallie Eckel. A wisp of gray hair fell over his right eye, and he brushed it aside with a deeply veined hand. His pale eyes glittered in the comm light. He watched Hallie on the holo, watching the smoothness of her young body glide from passageway to hatch to passageway. But the musk that surrounded him there in his office was Rachel. At times, Rachel Demarest seemed all bone and elbow to him, a hard woman hardly used. He developed an amused distance from her whine. She had dreams that included him because she wanted him, even if he was a sack of graying wrinkles and sour breath. She wanted power, and Ferry liked to snuggle up to power. They were good for each other, and they tricked themselves into a personal distance by trading information for liquor, wine for position, or a warm night together. This game of barter between them walled off the kind of hurt they'd both been dealt at the hands of whimsical lovers. Rachel was now asleep in his cubby, dreaming herself senior chair of a new council that would wrest power from Oaks, make the colony self-sufficient and self-governing. Ferry sat at his console, slightly drunk, dreaming of Hallie Eckel. He waited to shift to the next spy sensor until he could no longer make out the details of Hallie's small, firm hips tight against her jumpsuit. What luscious hips! As he switched sensors to the one ahead of them, he forgot to change focus. The two were a blur as they approached the sensor's forward field limit. Ferry fumbled with the controls and lost them. Damn! he whispered, and his old surgeon's hands were shaking like a weehee in a flare. He touched the screen to steady himself, touched Hallie's image blurring past the sensor and into a tree dome.
Enjoy, enjoy, my dears.
He spoke aloud, his words absorbed by the piled confusion around him. Everyone knew why young couples went into the tree dome. He checked to see that the holo was on record and that the sound levels were satisfactory. Lewis and Oakes would want to see this, and Ferry anticipated making a special copy for himself.
Give it to her, young fellow! Give it to her!
He felt a pleasant swelling at his crotch, and wondered if he could get away to visit Rachel Demarest.
Get something on that poet.
Get something on that poet,
Lewis had ordered, and he'd had 5 liters of the new Pandoran wine delivered to Ferry's office from Groundside by Rachel, a double gift. One of the empties lay across his mazed hookup to the biocomputer. Another empty was still on the deck of the cubby temporarily occupied by Rachel. She was a clone, one of the better ones, and wine was the treasure to her that Ferry was not. Rachel was the treasure to him that Eckel was not. Ferry watched the small touches between Peniel and Eckel, imagining every one of them to be his own.
Perhaps with a little wine,
he thought, and he leered at the faint, half-imagined nipples pressing her suit, shouting him out of her conversation with Peniel.
Are they going to couple?
He was beginning to doubt it. Peniel was not reacting correctly.
I should have told them about Peniel's groundside orders sooner.
That was always a good lever for sex. I'm going groundside soon, dear one. You know what the dangers are down there?
Go ahead, do it, fellow.
Ferry wanted to watch Hallie slip out of her single suit, wanted her to desire a horny old surgeon with that desire she had in her eyes for Peniel.
So you want to know about the kelp?
Ferry slurred to Peniel's reclining image in the view screen.
Well, you'll know it all soon enough, fellow. And Hallie...
His clammy fingers caressed the screen.
Perhaps Lewis can see to it that you are assigned to us here at Classification and Processing. Yes.
And the yes was a feverish hiss through his yellowed teeth. Suddenly, the conversation on the screen jarred him out of his daydream. He was sure he had heard correctly. Peniel had told Hallie Eckel that the kelp was sentient.
Damn you!
Ferry screamed at the viewer, and this became his low-voiced chant as the eavesdropping continued. Yes, Peniel was telling her everything. He was spoiling everything. Peniel was going groundside, was going to be out of the way. And all because of the kelp! Ferry was sure of it. The groundside orders must have been cut by Lewis or Oakes. That had to be because they were cut as soon as that mass of study circuits on the kelp started showing up on Peniel's program orders. Peniel was on to something, but could be stopped. He was quiet and could be removed quietly. The only logical reason for the delay in sending the fellow groundside had to be that order from Lewis.
get something on him.
Well, orders said the delay ended if Peniel started talking too much.
But damn him, he told her!
Ferry caught his breath and tried to calm himself. He opened his last bottle of wine, the fantasy bottle he would have offered to Eckel, if only in his dreams. He had neither the key, the code, nor the technical expertise to alter the holo recording to erase all evidence that Eckel, too, knew about the kelp. He took a long swallow of the wine and slammed the call key coded to her.
Hallie!
He threw the bottle across his office in rage, then lost his balance and fell against the console, breaking the call connection. He pushed himself back, calmed his voice, and once more opened the channel.
Sorry I dropped you. This is Winslow Ferry. Is that Caro Peniel with you, Hallie?
How he loved the sound of her name on his tongue, the touch of her in word. She laughed at him. Ferry had no recollection of ending the call, ordering Peniel to his office, but he knew he had done it. She laughed at him, and she knew about the kelp. When Lewis reviewed this holo record, and he would certainly do that, then Lewis would know that she had laughed at him, and Lewis would laugh because he often laughed at Ferry.
But it's always old Winslow who gets him what he needs.
Yes, always. When no one else could manage it, Winslow knew someone who knew someone who knew something, and had a price. Lewis would not care deeply that she laughed at old Winslow. Momentary amusement, that was all. But Lewis would care about the kelp. New orders would be cut for Eckel. Ferry knew that for certain. And wherever Eckel was assigned, it would not be to classification and processing.
A good bureaucracy is the best tool of oppression ever invented.
Jesus Lewis, The Oaks Diaries. When Riga had set behind the western hills, Wheela Taulini turned atop her craggy vantage to watch the red-orange ball of Alki cross the southern horizon in its first passage of the Diurn. She had only been forced to kill 3 demons in the past hour, and there seemed little more to do on this watch except mark the distant line of powdery red to the south where they had burned out a nerve runner boil just 2 diurns past. But it looked as though they had sterilized the area, although she could still detect an occasional whiff of burned acid from that direction. But swift grazers were already into the red, gorging on the dead runners. The bulbous little multipeds would not venture anywhere near a live boil of runners. As usual, she stood tall and alert on watch. She did not feel unusually exposed on the crag. There was escape hatch and slide tunnel 1 step away on her left. A sensor atop the tunnel's marker pole kept constant watch on her. She carried a gush burner and las gun. But even more important, she knew her own reflexes. Conditioned by the harsh requirements of Pandora, she could match anything except a massed attack by the planet's predators. Oh, 1 sec. I wanted to swap images. I think it's this first one here. Yeah, it's the one. As usual, oh no, we did that. Conditioned by the harsh requirements of Pandora, she could match anything except a massed attack by the planet's predators. And the Nerve Runner invasion had been turned back. Wheela crouched then, and stared down across the southern plain to the rim of hills. Without conscious volition, her gaze darted left, right. She stood and turned, repeated this procedure. It was all random, constant movement. Try to look everywhere at once. That was the watchword. Her yellow flare suit was damp with perspiration. She was tall and slim, and knew this gave her an advantage here. On patrol, she walked tall. Other times, she pulled in her shoulders and tried to appear shorter. Men did not like taller women, a continually bothersome fact which amplified her constant concern over her unavoidable peculiarity. Her skin changed color through a broad spectrum, from blue to orange in response to her moods, a system not under conscious control. Right now, her exposed skin betrayed the pale pink of repressed fear. Her hair was black and cropped at the neck. Her eyes were brown and shaded in epicanthic folds, but she felt that she had a slender and attractive nose which complemented her broad chin and full lips.
"Wheela, you're some kind of chameleon throwback,"
one of her friends had said. But he was dead now, drowned under the kelp. She sighed. She turned to the sound and, by reflex, gunned out 2 flatwings, thin and multi-legged ground racers about 10 centimeters long.
"Poisonous things."
Alki was 4 diameters above the southern horizon now, sending long shadows northward and painting a red-purple glow across the distant sea to the west. Wheela liked this particular watch station for its view of the sea. It was the highest vantage connected to Colony. They called it simply Peak. It's so peak. It's peak. P-E-A-K, peak. A line of highlighters drifted through the sky among the distant shoreline. Judging by their apparent size from this distance, they were giants. As with others among the shipmen colonists, she had studied the native life carefully, making the usual comparisons against ship records. The highlighters were, indeed, like giant airborne Portuguese men of war, great orange creatures born in the sea. Steadied by its long black tendrils, a highlighter could adjust the great membrane atop its buoyant bag and tack into the wind. They moved with a strange precision, usually in groups of 20 or more, and Wheela found herself on the side of those who argued for some intelligence in these gentle creatures. Highlighters were a nuisance, yes. They were buoyed by hydrogen, and that, coupled with Pandora's frequent electrical storms, made the creatures into lethal firebombs. In common with the electrokelp, they were useless as food. Even to touch them produced weird mental effects, hysteria, and even, sometimes, convulsions. Standing orders were to explode them at a distance when they approached the colony. Almost without thinking about it, she noted a spinneret creeping up the peak on her left. It was a big one. She guessed it would be equal the 5 kilos of the largest ever taken. Because the high-density, mole-like creature was Pandora's only slow mover, she took her time responding. Every opportunity to study Pandora's predators had to be used. It was as gray-black as the rocks, and she guessed its length at about 30 centimeters, not counting the spinner tail. The first colonists to encounter spinnerets had been trapped in the sticky fog the things released through that tail appendage. Wheela chewed her lower lip, watching the spinneret's purposeful approach. It had seen her, no doubt of that. The sticky mesh of the spinneret's fog produced a peculiar paralysis. It rendered everything it touched immobile, but alive and alert. The near-sighted spinneret, having trapped a victim, could suck the captive dry at a slow and agonizing pace. "Close enough," she whispered as the thing paused fewer than 5 meters below her and started turning to bring its lethal spinner into play. A quick red wash of the gush burner incinerated the spinneret. She watched the remains tumble off the peak. Alki was now 8 diameters above the horizon, and she knew her watch was almost over. She had been ordered to assess possible dangerous activity among the free-roaming predators. They all knew the reason for watching outside Colony's barriers. The visible human in a yellow flare suit would attract predators. "We're bait out there," one of her friends had said. Wheela resented the assignment, but in a place of common perils she knew she had to share every danger. That was Colony's social glue. Even though she would get extra food chits for this, she could not help resenting it. There were other dangers more important to her, and she saw this assignment as a symptom of perilous change in Colony priorities. Her place was out studying the kelp. As the sole survivor of the original study teams, she was the perfect choice for assembling a new team. "Are they phasing out our research?" There were rumors all through Colony. The materials and energy could not be spared for construction of strong enough submersibles. The LTAs could not be spared. Lighter than air was still the most reliable groundside transport for the mining and drilling outposts, and, because they had been built to simulate highlighters, they attracted minimal attention from predators. Highlighters appeared to be immune to the predators. She could see the rationale of the arguments. Kelp interfered with the aquaculture project and food was short. The argument for extermination, though, she saw as one of dangerous ignorance. "We need more information." Almost casually, she gunned out a hooded dasher, noting that it was the first one seen anywhere near the peak in 20 diurns.
The kelp must be studied. We must learn.
What did they know about the kelp after all the lives spent and all the frustrating dives?
Fireflies in the night of the sea, someone called them.
The kelp extruded nodules from its giant stems, and those nodules glowed with 1,000,000 fire colors. She agreed with all the others who had seen it and lived to report. The pulsing and glowing nodules were a hypnotic symphony, and the lights might, just might, be a form of communication. There did seem to be purpose in the glowing play of light, discernible patterns. The kelp covered the planet's seas except for a random patch of open water called. Oh, sorry. The kelp covered planet's. I'm just removing participles everywhere. The kelp covered the planet's seas except for the random patch of open water called lagoons. In a planet, it must be patches of open water. In a planet with only two major land masses, this represented a gigantic spread of life. Once again, she returned to that unavoidable argument. What did they really know about the kelp?
It's conscious. It thinks.
She was certain of it. The challenge of this problem engaged her imagination with a totality she had never dreamed possible. It had caught others as well. It was polarizing colony. And the extermination arguments could not be thrown out. Can you eat the kelp? You could not eat it. The stuff was disorienting, probably hallucinogenic. The source of this effect had thus far defied colony chemists to isolate it. It had this in common with the highlighters. The elusive substance had been dubbed frago because it fragments the psyche. That alone said to Wayla that the kelp should be preserved for study. Once more she was forced to kill a hooded dasher. The long black shape went tumbling down the peak, green blood gushing from it. That's too many of them, she thought. Warily she examined her surroundings, probing for movement below her in the rocks. Nothing. She was still scanning the area this way moments later when her relief stepped out of the hatch. She recognized him, Scott Burek, an LTA fitter on the nightside shift. He was a small man with prematurely aged features, but he was as quick as any other colonist, already scanning the area around them. She told him about the two dashers as she passed over the burner. "Good rest," he said. She slipped into the hatch, heard it slam behind her, then slid down to debriefing where she turned in her kill count and made her assessment of COA, current outside activity. The debriefing room was windowless, with pale yellow walls and a single comm desk. Ari Aronson, a blond, gray-eyed man who never seemed to change expression, sat behind it. Everyone said he worked for Jesus Lewis, a rumor which predisposed Wayla to walk and talk softly with him. Odd things happened to people who displeased Lewis. She was tired now with a fatigue which watch always produced. A drained feeling, as though she were a victim of a psychic spinneret. The routine questions bored her.
Yes, the nerve runner area appears sterilized.
At the end of it, Aronson handed her a small square of brown colony paper with a message which restored her energy. She read it at a glance.
Report to main hangar for new kelp research team assignment.
Aronson was glancing at his comm screen as she read the note, and now he changed expression, a wry smile.
Your replacement.
He pointed upward toward the peak with his chin.
Just got it. A dasher chewed his guts out. Stand by a blink. They're sending another replacement.
And that will do it for today, I think. Yes. Yes. I think so. Okay. So that is the opening 50 pages or so of The Jesus Incident. Now, why is it the Jesus Incident when we have a Jesus present? Well, we'll see. I'm reasonably confident it is Jesus for the title. It could go either way. That's one of the brilliant aspects of the book, is that it can be read in multiple different ways. There's a lot here. You've just been thrown way into the deep end. This book actually does the scut work of being like, here's background. The other books basically won't. They will kind of. Sometimes after things are relevant, sometimes right at about the time they are. You'll find out what I mean when we get there. Um, I'm a big fan. I've already mentioned, I'm on record as saying I'm a big Frank Herbert fan in general. Um, this trilogy in particular, I think largely because it is criminally underappreciated, is quite good. Um, I th- I do feel like the Jesus Incident is probably the strongest book of the series. But upon rereads, I have always gotten something worthwhile out of both the Lazarus Effect and um, the Ascension Factor. So, like most things that Frank Herbert has ever worked on rereads, something new and interesting comes out. Um, I don't have an absolutely uh, complete collection of Frank Herbert's works, but I have a fair percentage of the stuff he's released. We will eventually get to most of it. I probably won't wind up doing Dune, shockingly, um, only because it has been done by far better people than I, sometimes with fully voiced cast, with different actual people doing character roles. So I highly recommend seeking those out. Um, as always, if this is in any way interesting to you, um, please do not hesitate to acquire a copy of the book. Um, I don't know that this is in print anymore. It probably isn't. Um, but there's plenty of different editions out there that you can acquire online. Uh, use your own personal ways and means commission if you must. But definitely try and get a copy of the book. It's well worth reading. I am noticing that there are a fair amount of spelling flubs in this. Few of them are going to be problematic. I don't know if it's an issue with the edition that I have. I don't think this is a first ed. Um, I can't remember if I got this by purchasing it after the fact or if I got it in a book sale. Yeah, this is not a first ed. It was originally published in 1979, and it's well worth reading. So going forward, this will occupy us on Fridays for the next several months. Um, it's not a tremendously beefy book, but it's long enough that it's going to take us. It's like 400 odd pages long. If we do it at 50 pages a whack, it'll be like, I don't know, 8 installments at least. So we will see. After that, we'll get started on what's it called? For Fridays anyway. The Dark Forest by Shijin Liu. Sorry. It has been brought to my attention recently that the English edition of uh, The Dark Forest has like a really major plot translation issue. It's not tremendously important for the series as a whole, but it's like kind of a really big reference to ball lightning. Um, I'll probably talk about that after we finished reading the book, or at least after that portion of the book is relevant, which is, I don't know, 2/3 of the way through probably. Um, I did not know this was a thing, but apparently it is. I will bring it up, but that's all I'll do. Um, so yeah. So for Monday, I still don't know what I'm going to do. You'll find out when I do. It'll be probably either some semi-ironically reading the book Manfac by the guy who did $6 Million Man. Um, I forget the author's name right now, and I don't have a copy of the book right in front of me, but I can see it from where I'm sitting, but I can't see the author's name. Sorry. Oh yes, yes I can. Yes I can. Martin Caden. It'll either be Manfac, it'll Yukikaze by Chohei Kambayashi, or Full Metal Panic by author whose name I can't remember off the top of my head. Sorry. Um, I have definitely realized with my advancing age that I have an even harder time with names and remembering them. I apologize for this. Especially when I need to remember it quickly, I can never do so. So you'll just have to be kind with me. Or don't be kind. It's fine. I acknowledge this as a failing of mine. Anyway, with that, I'm going to scooch. Oh, Wednesdays we'll continue reading through Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. I think it was during our reading of Destination Void that someone asked for me to read Frankenstein. So hopefully you're getting what you want out of that. Yeah, that'll be another couple installments. I don't know how many. It won't be cleanly at the end of the month, I don't think. It'll probably be a little bit afterwards. Um, but that's fine. Because I also want to do, there's 2 short stories included as well in the appendices. Um, a Fragment by Lord Byron and The Vampire, A Tale um, by Dr. John William Polidori. So I do kind of want to read those because they're fun. They're fun little short stories. So that'll probably be another stream on top of that. After that, Wednesdays are going to be Anything Goes. By that time, if I have read through um, Absolution, since it will be out by then, there is a possibility we can do that on Wednesdays, though I doubt it. Because there's so many other things that I have backlogged that would probably also be a good idea to do. Possibly I'll do some Greg Egan because it's been a hot minute since I did anything Egan. Um, I don't know what I would do. Probably one of his novels because I've gone through now on stream all of his big short story collections that have more than like 4. Um, but he has other ones, namely Phoresis, and there's another one that I can't remember the name of. I'm looking at it. Oh no, that one isn't one. Never mind. Phoresis will be like the last short story collection I have by him. He's got others that were published earlier, but there's a lot of overlap between them and previously released ones, or they currently released ones. So I don't know that it would be tremendously worthwhile to get a copy. And my searches initially to find copies were in vain. There's also a short story collection by Peter Watts that I've done like 1 or 2 stories from already that I'll probably do. Um, Failing that, I do want to get around to reading some Ian M. Banks on stream. I've done a few short stories, but not much more than that. I think I did the one where he basically explains the background idea work for the culture. That's with a capital C. Um, but I haven't read any of the novels proper. I would start with Consider Phlebas, which I've harped on, I think, before at length as being the most. It's simultaneously like the best way to start and maybe also kind of the weirdest way to start reading the Culture series, because chronological, it's the first one in the in-universe timeline, which isn't particularly strict. Um, you can really realistically read them in virtually any order. It doesn't matter. There will be references to things, but like they either are so distant that they don't matter or will be explained adequately. But it's generally not going to be. It's mostly like fan service nods, basically. If you've been reading this series for X amount of time, this is going to be a nod that you'll get. Other than that, it's just funsies. Um, the other reason Consider Phlebas is a really, really weird place to start the series is it's starting the series that's basically about this utopian culture by using a perspective character who is actively antagonistic towards said utopian superculture, super civilization. It's really weird. Um, it works. It's one of those things where you don't really understand how well it works until you've read the rest of the body of work and then gone back to it, and you're like, holy spinoli, what a brilliant move. What an insane power move it is to be like, yeah, the first book about this culture, the culture, this utopian society, is going to be by a guy who hates everything they stand for and explains his reasons why. it's it's bold. It's like those are some brass balls. Um, like it's one of those. It's clear that he situations where it's clear that Banks had this universe fleshed out extremely well in his head, and in whatever writing material he used to support himself. More on that. Um, what really reinforced that he had just how rich he it was in the background, and so little of it's even touched on in the series itself, is this art book. I think it's called The Art of the Culture, and it's basically a collection of his scribbled notes. And you really can't read most of them because they're in this tight script that he's using, and a lot of them are just like footnotes for himself, being like, "Remind me of this." Think of that thing, that sort of thing, where it's like you don't really get it and you don't even get it even if you have read the series, because it's stuff that's all in his head. It's kind of this brilliant manuscript, like just document that's documenting all the stuff that he's done, like in terms of demo scrawl work and beta ideas that he was going through. There's doodles, there's written ideas, there's maps, there's maps, there's maps, there's maps. There's lots of maps. Basically, he ran that series like the best kind of Dungeons and Dragons DM would, where it's like he has all this supplemental material back at his house, but that's only for his reference. That's only for him. Like he's the only one who needs that information. You don't. So it's like when I realized what I was looking at when I had gotten it, and I got it as an impulse. I'm like, oh, Banks will get that. He's been dead however long, and it's more stuff on the culture. I love the culture books. And when I realized what it was, I was like, I think I need to stop because this will ruin it for me. It does nothing of the sort. I can rarely say that about something that's like could be argued is a deconstruction of their work, of the process, if nothing else. Anyway, that's me harping excitedly about the brilliance that was Ian M. Banks. Um, just about everything he's done has been audiobooked out to here. So it'll be another example of, oh, Frag does something popular again. Um, anyway, yeah. With that, stay safe, stay sane, and be decent to each other. Hope you enjoyed, and see you all next time. Until that time, then, toodaloo.